So here again black is just a full rook down just for 2 pawns, but in this position it is white the one who has to be careful. Hi there, today we're going to analyze one of the nicest, if not the nicest, positional rook sacrifice that I've ever seen, and this game is a great example of how rooks need open files to work. You probably heard this already, so if rooks don't have open files, they can be spectators of the game, really bad pieces. And another important point that we'll learn in this game is something that top players are really good at, which is the importance of having a position that is easier to play, even if you have a worse position. So in this game we have former world champion Veselin Topalov playing as black, one of my favorite players, a really dynamic, aggressive and creative player. So the game started with the move e4, and after e5, bishop to c4, we get the bishop's opening, which is already a bit original. Knight to f3 is a lot more common before developing the bishop. Black went knight to f6, attacking the pawn. d3 is very common here. And here black has two main ideas. One of them is the natural developing move knight to c6, or the other idea is to go c6 with the main idea of going d5. White went knight to f3, seemingly attacking the pawn e5. And here Topalov already deviated from the main lines. Instead of playing d5, he went bishop to e7, which at this level is probably a very basic trap that white didn't fall for, which is that after taking the pawn e5 and queen to a5, we get a fork and black wins a piece. So here white simply castled. Now there's the idea to take the pawn e5, that's why black played d6. And here white went a4, which is not a very common move. This prevents some b5 ideas. But white here has other more common moves like going rook to e1 or bishop to b3, anticipating some b5 or d5 ideas that black may have. But a4 is definitely an option, maybe not a very critical move because in the game black got a fairly playable position, at least in the opening. Here black castled, and after rook to e1, knight b to d7. Now d5 might be an idea, that's why white went knight to c3, preventing this idea. And after knight to c5, white went d4, and after pawn takes and knight takes, black went a5, preventing some b4 ideas, attacking the knight on c5. And here white went bishop to f4. And here Topalov already played a somewhat ambitious move, he went knight to g4, with the idea to improve the knight and bring it to e5. Now that white played the bishop to f4, there's no f4 ideas, at least white cannot play that quickly, that's why the knight wants to go to e5. Here white went bishop to e2, which is an option, but this is probably a recurring idea in the game. White played very solidly. Here white had an interesting idea to try to fight for an advantage by going knight to f5, putting pressure on d6, and also planning to take on e7. And after bishop takes and pawn takes, in these positions, if black manages to go d5, black would normally be okay, having very good control of the center and also attacking the bishop on c4. But in this particular position, black has the knight on g4 being attacked. That's why black is in no time to play a quick d5. So this was a very interesting way for white to continue. Black still has to equalize this position. But here white, probably respecting his opponent a bit too much, went bishop to e2, attacking the knight on g4. The idea is that after knight to e5, white has very good control of the g4 square, so white can play something like bishop to e3 and then attack the knight on e5. So here black went back to f6, attacking the pawn on e4, and after bishop to f3, this bishop doesn't look particularly useful here, but the position still remains fairly balanced. Black went rook to e8, the main idea being to move the bishop and then put some pressure on e4. And after queen to d2, g6, h3, here black could have played something like bishop to f8, and then bring the bishop to g7. But Topalov is a more creative player, he went knight f to d7, again with the idea to bring the knight to e5. Black went rook a to d1, bishop to f8, g4, queen to b6, and here white went bishop to g2, offering this pawn on b2, which is a fairly direct trap because taking it is really bad. White will simply trap the queen after rook to b1, queen to a3, rook to a1, queen to b4 is the only move for the queen, and after white brings the other rook, queen to c4 and bishop to f1. This is a fairly forcing line that a strong player can easily see. Black has the queen trapped in this line. So black went knight to e5, and after b3, queen to b4, white went knight d to e2, black played f6, both sides are slowly maneuvering. Black is still not rushing to develop this bishop because it still has a nice activity on its initial square. So here white went bishop to e3. Just want to clarify, in general, taking the knight would really help black, because after taking, for example, with the d pawn, black has very good control of the dot squares, and this bishop on f8 is going to be very strong now that it cannot be challenged. So white's idea is very good, bishop to e3, planning to go f4 and kick away this very strong knight on e5. And here black could play something like bishop to e6, connecting rooks, but after a move like f4 and the knight moves, for example, to d7, this position is preferable for white. White has more space on the king side, this queen on b4 doesn't make a lot of sense, so this was an option, but a fairly passive one. Preventing f4 does not look very nice, because after f4, pawn takes and knight takes, black has created a lot of weaknesses. This knight might jump to h5 and attack f6, so this is already positionally very ugly for black. So bishop to e6 was the solid option, but white is still quite comfortable there. Instead, black decided to go all in and went h5. And this has a few ideas. So if white takes, black's idea is not to take on h5, because this would open the g file. White can play something like king to h2, also f4, but now white will start bringing the pieces to the g file and try to attack black's king. But here the idea was a rather tactical one, which is to take this pawn h3. Just deflecting the bishop, so taking here is really bad, because after knight to f3 we get a fork. And here white can continue differently, for example taking the pawn on g6, but this position is already quite chaotic, which is the kind of positions that Topalov loved to play. So here white went f4, attacking the knight, which was the main idea. And again, Topalov doesn't want to play passively and play something like knight to f7, going back. His idea was to sacrifice on g4, and after pawn takes and bishop takes, black got a couple of pawns for a knight, and black will try to fight from the center as we see in the game. Here white played queen to c1. As I mentioned, this was probably white's main mistake in this game, just playing too solidly. Here white should have improved his pieces by going bishop to d4, for example, eyeing this pawn f6. Instead he went queen to c1. Even though this has an idea to go rook to d4, it's probably a bit too complicated. Black played the move f5, white went rook to d4. If white takes on f5, the main idea is to take with the pawn, and then go d5, gaining more space on the center, maybe bring a knight to e4. So rook to d4 is definitely a better option. And after queen to f6 and queen to d2, black went queen to c7, bishop to f2, both sides are keeping the tension. Here black went rook to e6. Black also doesn't want to trade here, because after knight takes, white is simply activating his pieces. So black is a piece down, black wants to limit white's pieces, not activate them. So instead he played rook to e6 with the idea to double rooks on the e file, increasing the pressure on e4, and after rook to c4, rook a to e8, knight to d4 was the idea of rook to c4, attacking the rook. And in this position, if the rook moves, white's idea is to go e5, undermining this pawn which is defending the knight on c5. So Topalov is a very uncompromised player. For him it was always about having the initiative, and here he played this very nice move, rook takes e4. At least from a practical point of view, this is a very interesting move. So now black is sacrificing an exchange, but black was already a piece down. So after knight takes e4, knight takes e4, this knight is very strong. Sooner or later white will have to take it. Bishop takes and pawn takes. Black only has 3 pawns for the rook, but let's evaluate some pluses that black has in this position. This pawn f4 is an isolated pawn, which as we'll see in the game is going to be a target in a lot of lines. White has very good control of the center, d5 will come sooner or later, c5 and d4 might be an idea later on in the game. There are actually no open files in this position. White's rooks are doing nothing here. This rook on c4 is actually very misplaced. The main goal of chess is attacking, and these rooks cannot attack anything so far. So even though this position is objectively better for white, it's a lot easier for black to play. So black wants to either attack this pawn f4 or just gain a central domination. So it is not a surprise that black won this game. And actually white already has to be a bit careful, because black has a threat here. For example, if white plays a waiting move like king to h1, black's idea is to go d5, and after rook to c3, bishop to b4 would pin this rook. So white plays some very good defensive moves, at least for some time. So here he went rook to c3 with the idea to activate the rook, and after d5 and rook to g3, black went bishop to d6, so black's play is very easy as opposed to white's. And here white went bishop to e3, defending the pawn f4, which is objectively even the best move or one of the strongest moves. But I just want to mention again a practical move that was very interesting for white to play here, which is to take the bishop on g4, just giving some material back. When you have a lot of material advantage, giving material back is a very common resource. And after pawn takes, first of all, white managed to ruin black's pawn structure. And after bishop to e3, white has some ideas to attack, which is something that didn't happen in the game. So here white has an idea to bring the queen to h2 and then attack black's pawns. For example, bring a queen to h4 or h6, or even go queen to g2 and attack this pawn on g4. This knight that is going to be attacked sooner or later might have an idea to go to g3, where it will be blocking the g4 pawn. So white has clear plans here, which is something that didn't happen in the game. For example, here after queen to f7, queen to h2, rook to f8, knight to e2, black can try to go c5 with the idea to play d4, gaining space on the center, but white can play c3 here, preventing this idea, and here black is the one who has to try to prove compensation for the piece. So instead white went bishop to e3, black played queen to d7. This is a very useful move whenever black plays c5 after knight to b5, the knight will not attack the queen, and even now after rook takes g4, black can take on g4 with the queen, so black might already plan to go c5 and then d4. That's why white went c3, and after rook to f8, white played rook to f1. Again, white is playing passively, so remember that rooks need open files. So the main idea that white should have tried in this game is to open files. So playing before, here, or in the next moves was black's main idea to try to get some activity for his rooks. Because after rook to f1, b6, white played rook to f2, just very solid, and after c5, black went knight to b5, which is a move that I didn't like a lot. Knight to e2 looked like a better option, because after knight to b5, here black went bishop to b8, bishop to e7, planning to go bishop to h4 was also very interesting. And the point is that after bishop to b8, this bishop is still being very active on the king side, and this knight on b5 is not doing anything there. White kept on playing waiting moves, and here black increased the pressure with g5. This pawn is pinned. White went rook to f2, just waiting. And here black played a very nice maneuver. Let's remember that black is a rook down, but black is in no hurry and started slowly improving his position. He went king to g7, just planning to bring the king to g6 to a more active square. And after queen to c1, king to g6, queen to f1, white is just defending, rook to f5, black is slowly improving his position, rook to g2, and after queen to f7, increasing the pressure on f4, white finally took, and black's idea was to go bishop to f3, just closing the lines for the rook, also attacking this rook on g2, and after white moved the rook to h2, bishop takes, and rook takes. Topalov played a very nice move, rook to f4, again he doesn't care about material, he just wants to attack with rook to g4, white took on f4, and after queen takes. So here again black is just a full rook down just for 2 pawns, but in this position it is white the one who has to be careful. Black has a lot of ideas to attack, even push the pass pawns as we'll see, so this position is a lot easier to play as black. And here in this position white made the critical mistake by going rook to g2. Queen to h3 was the main idea in order to create counterplay against black's king. The position is still extremely rational, anything can happen here, but white had to go for counterplay, which is something that he never did in this game. Because after rook to f2, even though black cannot capture the rook because the bishop is pinned, black can simply continue improving his position, pushing the pass pawn, h4, and after queen to e1, e3, black is still improving his position. This knight is just a mere spectator, and after rook to h2, queen takes, king to f1, h3 is a very nice tactical move. The point is that after rook takes and queen to g2 we get a checkmate. The game is amazingly already over. White gave a check, but after bishop to e4, queen to b2 and bishop to e3, in this position white resigned because after king to e1 and queen to g1 we get a checkmate. Or if white blocks the check, black can also force a checkmate after queen to g2, this rook is pinned, king to e1 and queen to g1. So I hope that you enjoyed this game. Sacrificing a rook for long-term compensation is very strange. This was a very intuitive sacrifice based on this very important principle that rooks need to have open files, otherwise they can be very lousy pieces. If you want a training routine to get better at chess, I have a free course for that you might want to check in the description. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.